My name is Katrina Rogers. I live in Santa Barbara, California. I'm the Associate Provost for Academic Entrepreneurship. I also am a faculty member in the School of HOD. My fields are environmental policy and political science, and I currently write on sustainability leadership. I think of social justice as a specific area of social change. To me, social change is the term that I like to use because it's more of a container that attracts a wide range of people. I think a lot of people don't really understand what social justice is. Our definition at Fielding, which came out of our Diversity Summit 2 years ago, talks about ameliorating inequality, speaking up about oppression when you find it. I mean, those are the kinds of terms that you hear when you talk about social justice. And I think one of the fundamental values of Fielding that is really compelling is social justice, diversity, and transformational learning. These are really fundamental values that we care about and we try to make real in the world. But I use the term social change to kind of encompass those ideas, transformation, justice, diversity, because I think that for some people those terms are not easy to understand. They're not really accessible for people who may not be experienced in reading and the literature and the scholarship and the practice of it. But you can attract people to Fielding, sort of meet them where they are around the idea that we all have an obligation, because we're all privileged in a sense. If you are a graduate student in the United States and you get a doctorate, you represent only 1% of the population. So automatically you have an obligation, I think, and a responsibility to give back in some way to either in your practice or in your work or in your community or in your family, the things that you have learned, that so many people will never have access to this kind of learning. So to me, that is part of what we do, is we try to encourage people. We try to create environments and spaces for them to ask all kinds of questions. Some of those questions you wouldn't ask if you weren't in a learning community. And some of the questions you may never really answer, but they're questions we ask around what is our individual responsibility and role in creating a more just society? What does that really mean? What does it mean when we participate in structures that are unequal, that are unjust for other people who may be sitting in the same room with us? And may be unjust to me. We are all participating in a kind of system of injustice simply by the structures that our society has created. And to just acknowledge that and recognize it is the first and second step of change. I think a really good example of education and social justice, and the kind of thing that I'd like to do more of at Fielding, or what I think that Fielding is good at doing, is a story I read about a young man who had gone to college, and he'd been living as a teenager in Brookstone, which is a poor section of New York City, and he would commute every day to Manhattan. And when he took that commute every day, he'd move from a really impoverished environment. He'd see the public housing, it was very poor, and he in his head as a teenager, he'd think about poverty in kind of this sort of blanket way, and it's just awful. And then he'd get off his the commuter train, and he'd be in Manhattan, and it's all beautiful and skyscrapers and so on. Then he went to college. When he got out of college, he moved back home. He needed a job, it's a bad economy. And he was taking the commute again. Now, okay, so he's gone to college, he's taking the commute, he's 22 years old, out of work, looking for work. And what he began to realize is that his college experience, now the commute, was a totally different story for him. So now when he traveled from these impoverished area to Midtown Manhattan, he thought about the structural conditions of poverty, the other things that make poverty possible. And what excited him about that were the possibilities for change. So he couldn't have thought about that if he hadn't gone to college. He couldn't have even thought about that you can change because I can recognize that there may be other reasons why people are living in poverty. And I think that's what Fielding is capable of.